There is a pattern most people spend years trying not to see. It is one of the most painful patterns in human psychology because it asks you to question something you've been taught to believe since childhood. That family automatically means safety. That love automatically means protection. That the people who share your blood will naturally protect your peace. But life has a way of introducing uncomfortable truths. Sometimes the deepest emotional wounds are not inflicted by strangers. They are left by the people who know exactly where your heart is. The people who watched you grow. The people whose approval once felt like survival. The people whose voices slowly became your own inner voice. That is why family pain feels different. When a stranger hurts you, your mind builds distance. When family hurts you, your mind often builds guilt. You begin asking questions that quietly follow you for years. Maybe I'm expecting too much. Maybe I'm the difficult one. Maybe if I try harder, things will finally change. But hidden beneath those questions, there is another pattern. It quietly keeps people trapped inside relationships that slowly drain them. Not because they're weak, because hope can become stronger than reality. And hope without awareness can become its own prison. The hardest lesson many people will ever learn is this: love and toxicity can exist inside the same relationship. One does not automatically erase the other. Someone can genuinely love you and still manipulate you. Someone can care about you and still repeatedly damage your peace. Human beings are capable of carrying affection and dysfunction at the same time. Once you see that pattern, many things begin making sense. Because healing does not begin when other people finally change. Healing begins the moment you stop expecting reality to become something it has never shown itself capable of being. The first pattern is acceptance. Most people misunderstand acceptance. They believe accepting someone's behavior means approving of it. Psychology suggests something very different. Acceptance is not surrender. Acceptance is accuracy. It is the moment emotion stops arguing with evidence. Think about how much energy people spend trying to rewrite someone else's personality, trying to convince the emotionally unavailable person to become emotionally available, trying to convince the manipulative person to become honest, trying to convince someone who repeatedly violates boundaries to suddenly begin respecting them. Eventually, you discover something quietly devastating. People rarely change because someone else needs them to. They change only when they become uncomfortable living as they are. Until then, you may spend years negotiating with a version of someone that exists only inside your imagination. There is extraordinary freedom in finally seeing someone exactly as they are, not who they could become, not who they were once, not who they promise to become next time, who they consistently choose to be. Because once reality becomes clearer, your decisions become easier. Peace often begins where illusion ends. Then another pattern quietly appears. It hides inside something most people do every single day without noticing: explaining themselves. Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling strangely exhausted? Not because anyone shouted, not because anyone threatened you, simply because you spent 30 minutes defending a decision that should never have required a defense. You explained, they questioned. You clarified, they misunderstood. You explained again, and somehow the conversation ended exactly where it began. There is a psychological reason this happens. Not everyone asks questions because they want understanding. Some people ask questions because questions create control. As long as you keep defending yourself, they remain in charge of the conversation. Emotionally intelligent people eventually recognize this hidden pattern. Understanding is offered, not demanded. You do not owe endless explanations for protecting your mental health. You do not need unanimous approval before making healthy decisions. Sometimes silence communicates more strength than another perfectly constructed argument. Not because silence wins debates, because silence refuses to participate in conversations designed to never end.
There is another pattern hidden beneath this one. People often confuse kindness with accessibility. They believe being loving means remaining permanently available. Psychology draws a very different distinction. Healthy people understand boundaries, not as walls, not as punishment, but as information. A boundary quietly communicates one message. This is how I allow myself to be treated. Nothing more, nothing less. Imagine a beautiful garden. Without a fence, anyone can walk inside. Some will admire the flowers, some will protect them, others will trample everything without noticing. The fence does not exist because the flowers hate people. It exists because beauty requires protection. The human mind works exactly the same way. Boundaries do not separate you from love. They separate love from exploitation. Which explains something fascinating. The people who become most upset when you establish healthy boundaries are often the people who benefited most from your lack of them. Not because boundaries are cruel, because boundaries quietly redistribute power. People-pleasing slowly disappears. Self-respect quietly takes its place. And that transition rarely feels comfortable. Not because you're doing something wrong, because you're changing a pattern other people had learned to depend on.
There is another pattern that quietly destroys more inner peace than almost anything else. It begins with a single moment. Someone criticizes you, dismisses you, mocks you, twists your words, or deliberately presses the one emotional wound they know still hasn't healed. Immediately, your nervous system prepares for battle. You want to explain, correct them, defend yourself, prove they misunderstood. But hidden beneath that instinct lies a question almost nobody asks. Who benefits if I react? Because not every conflict is searching for resolution. Some conflicts are searching for participation. Toxic dynamics survive because two people continue feeding the same emotional cycle. One provokes, the other reacts. The reaction becomes new fuel. The cycle repeats, again and again. Psychologists often describe this through the concept of emotional regulation. The person who cannot regulate themselves unconsciously tries to regulate themselves through someone else's emotions. If they can make you angry, they no longer feel alone in their chaos. If they can make you defensive, they temporarily regain a sense of control. The remarkable thing is that your peace was never actually taken. It was invited into their emotional weather, and you accepted the invitation. Emotionally intelligent people eventually discover something profoundly liberating. Not every insult deserves an audience. Not every accusation deserves an answer. Not every storm deserves your presence. Sometimes the strongest response is not silence because you have nothing to say. It is silence because you finally understand what the conversation was truly trying to accomplish. There is another hidden pattern that quietly follows many people throughout adulthood. It wears a different mask: approval. For some people, their entire identity slowly becomes organized around one invisible question. Will they finally be proud of me? They work harder, achieve more, become more successful, become more agreeable, more accommodating, more available, not because those things make them happy, because somewhere inside them still lives a child hoping that this achievement, this sacrifice, this version of themselves will finally be enough. But here's the pattern almost nobody notices. Approval that is constantly withheld becomes one of the most powerful emotional addictions. Because every small moment of validation feels unpredictable, and unpredictable rewards create the strongest attachments. Psychology has observed this for decades.